Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Digital Nomad World Weekly Podcast. I'm Becky, and I'll be your host. And today we're going to talk about mastering the business of yoga with my guest, Amanda Kingsmith. Amanda, welcome back to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be back.
I'm so excited to have you back. For those of you who watch our show every week, may remember that I had Amanda on with her husband, Ryan, at the end of 2022, and they talked about starting a family as digital nomads. And I was kind of minded my own business or other people's business on Instagram recently. And I saw that Amanda posted, much to everybody's surprise, because you didn't tell anybody this from what you said in your post. This was a big secret. You had been working on a book about mastering the business of yoga. And I have the Kindle version. You give practical tools and tips to help yoga teachers create thriving businesses. So I'm so excited to talk about this with you today, Amanda.
Yeah, thank you so much. And yeah, I wasn't like 100% convinced I was ever going to like get this book out to the world like we were talking about before we hit record. It's like so much work to just write a book and publish it. And, I have a toddler and stuff like that. And so I just wasn't telling people I worked on it. And then I got it done and put it out there. And I was like, oh, yeah, by the way, I wrote a book.
That's so amazing. I wish we need to do a separate show about how you managed to do that, because I know so many people want to finish books as well.
Yeah, a lot of help.
All right, but let's get into your yoga journey to start with, because people can go back and listen to your digital nomad journey with the other show that I mentioned if they'd like. But we really want to focus on yoga today. And I started with this picture behind me today. I wish I was actually here, but you actually got your yoga teacher training in Bali. So if I understand it, that's where everything began, right?
Yeah, for yoga teaching. So I'd been practicing yoga for a number of years before I did my yoga teacher training in 2015. I think I started practicing yoga in like 2007 pretty casually. And then it was actually when my husband and I were traveling in South America in 2014, I decided to practice in every country that we went to. So I could practice in Spanish and all the different accents across all the different countries, and Portuguese and Brazil. And when I came back, it's kind of when I took my like career U-turn is what I call it, when I decided that, hey, I don't want to work in corporate anymore. I want to do something else. And part of that journey was just exploring what I wanted to do. And I decided, hey, let's do a yoga teacher training. I love yoga. I've been kind of interested in the idea of sharing the practice with other people. Let's see if this is something that I like, something that I'm good at, something I could pursue as a career. And so in the spring of 2015, I traveled solo all the way to Bali to do my 200-hour yoga teacher training program.
And what is the teacher training like? I will tell everybody now, I'm a yoga, I've only gone to classes a few times. I've never been able to get deep into it. And I hope that this book is going to inspire me to do that more. But yeah, what's the teacher training like?
Yeah, so there's kind of different forms of teacher training programs that you can do. Most like introductory programs for teachers are 200 hours. That's kind of what the governing body, which is called Yoga Alliance, has kind of decided is like, hey, we're going to do 200 hours to start. Not every program follows that, but in general, I would say that's a pretty good like standard. And the one that I did was immersive. So it was like 30 days. We basically did yoga like and yoga teaching like 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., like 6 days a week. And then we would have a day off. And so we did that for 4 weeks to get the 200 hours in. There's other programs like when I did my 300-hour, which is an advanced program, I did it like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, kind of 9 to 5, and then Thursdays like 9 to noon for 3 months. And then a lot of other programs will do like weekends. So I teach in a teacher training program. I teach the business of yoga for one in Vancouver, and they do, I think it's like 4 hours on Wednesday and Thursday evenings each, and then Saturday, Sundays, like full days. And those go for like 3 or 4 months. So there's a lot of different variety in the terms of like style of program that you can do. But for me at the time, I really wanted to get away. I wanted to immerse myself. I wanted to have no commitments, nothing to distract me. I just wanted to go do the teacher training program. And so, yeah, that's what I did.
Wow. And I don't know. I think things have changed a lot in the last couple of years as well. But is it possible to get your 200-hour teacher training completely online these days?
Yeah, so this was something kind of pre-pandemic. Yoga Alliance refused to certify any training programs online. There still were teachers doing it. And actually, one of the interviews that I featured in the book, with Brett Larkin. She is a pretty big following, pretty big name in the yoga world. And she created her business entirely online. And she's been doing yoga teacher training programs for years and years, and just kind of said, like, if Yoga Alliance won't allow me to certify teachers through their thing, that's fine. I know this is a good program. I'm going to go ahead and do it anyways. But with the pandemic and everything going online and all the shutdowns and the fact that, like, all these businesses who rely on these programs to survive basically were not able to do things in person because of regulations, Yoga Alliance came around and said, okay, we can do, mixed programs. We can do online only programs and stuff like that. So you just have to submit your curriculum to them. So yeah, there's tons of options now. I will say that if you are looking for one, it is really, I would just look at a lot of reviews and stuff like that, just because there's a lot of programs out there, and there's some that are like, become a certified yoga teacher in 4 days or something like that, and it's like, whoa, that's really not enough time to be learning everything that you need to know to become a yoga teacher. But yeah, there's tons of amazing programs online. Like right now I'm doing an amazing continuing education program, so it's like an additional training on top of what I have in yin yoga, as well as another one in yoga nidra. And yeah, completely online, in both really amazing programs in different ways. So lots of options there.
One of the things that I'm really gathering from reading your book is how much there is out there in terms of yoga. In terms of the business side, there's so many things that I hadn't thought about. And I'm gonna list a few and ask you about them now. So
Okay.
one, you talk about teaching virtual audio classes. And I was wondering if you could expand on that for people who are now also thinking, what do you mean? How can we teach a virtual audio class? I didn't know this was a thing with yoga.
Yeah. So obviously the pandemic was like extremely challenging in so many ways for us, as a collective and also individually. But I think there was some really beautiful silver linings that came out of it, and particularly in the yoga industry. And one of them was that these shutdowns and studios shutting down and people not being able to come to classes really forced teachers to get creative. And so that particular example is with a dear friend of mine. He's a yoga teacher based out of Toronto, Canada. His name's Jaffer Hussein. Actually, I just re-interviewed him for this season of my podcast, and that'll be out in a couple of weeks, maybe even before this comes live. And he decided to do his classes entirely audio. So recording them entirely just the audio, because he was never the type of teacher that just sat at the front of the room and like did demonstrations of all the poses. He was always walking around. So his classes were kind of audio only anyways, except everyone was in the room so they could see each other. And obviously he was there. And so he just sits and leads with his voice. And then obviously the recordings don't have, any video. And what he likes about that is that it's easier on the teacher physically, mentally, emotionally to teach that way. So you're not like trying to watch your class on a, Zoom where there's a million little boxes popping up and make sure everyone's good and safe. But you're also not like tuckering yourself out. You're not tiring yourself out because you're trying to teach and like watch all the poses. And he created an entire membership like this that has been quite successful. And when I caught up with him, I was like, are you still doing this? And he's like, yeah, I still upload classes, once a week type thing for my membership. People still love it. And so, yeah, he kind of just decided to scratch the video aspect of it, not worry about it, and just do audio only, which I was like, that's kind of brilliant. I love that idea.
Yeah, there's so many different innovations and ways you can go with yoga. Okay, and you mentioned something that was actually next on my list, the membership. So what is a yoga membership, and how can this be an important part of your business?
Yeah, so this is something that studios have done for ages and ages, probably decades at this point, where you can go to a studio, you can buy a drop-in class. Probably most of us are familiar with that if we've practiced yoga. Or maybe you can buy a pack of classes, like 5 or 10, or you could get a monthly membership. So say you can spend, let's just say $100 for easy numbers, $100 a month, and you get access to all of their classes. You can come and go as you want. You could do 2 classes back to back. You get this unlimited membership. And because of the way that the yoga industry was kind of pre-pandemic, a lot of teachers individually were not having these offerings. But because so many studios closed down, they were kind of forced into a position where they were like, hey, I need to consider what my options are to run my own business. And I think also with things going online, it offered a lot of opportunity where it's like, I don't have to rent studio space. I can do things from the comfort of my home. I can do things online. People are now familiar with Zoom, et cetera, et cetera. And so teachers are being able to kind of adopt this sort of membership model, which is sort of like, I mean, if you don't know yoga or yoga studios, if you think like Netflix, Amazon Prime, Disney Plus, you charge somebody an amount per month that gives them access to everything. And so you can either do, live classes, or you could create a video library, kind of exactly like Netflix, but yoga style. And you could have your own students come and purchase your membership for a monthly cost. And so it's kind of just the idea of individual teachers going out and creating their own, individual businesses outside of the studio, where they can kind of adopt this sort of Netflix model, I guess you could say.
Nice. Yeah, the technology has come so far, even before Zoom. I think all the things we can do here, it's really allowing so many different things. So, okay, that makes sense. And then I'm really curious because as I just said, there's so many ways we can go with yoga. There's a whole section in your book about how to find your yoga niche. How can we find our yoga niche? And what are some popular ones out there these days?
Yeah, for sure. That's a great question. So, because the yoga space has gotten so just busy, saturated, there's a lot of yoga teachers, in 2023, 2024. It's really important to kind of find what you're good at, what you specialize in. So, I think kind of gone are the days where it's just like, hey, I'm like an all levels vinyasa flow teacher. I just teach at a bunch of studios doing this. That's fine. That's a great place to start. If you want to just do this part-time, that's a great place to kind of stay. But if you want to be a full-time yoga teacher, you want to create like a long-term sustainable business, you're going to have to build your business in a bigger way. And one of the things that is really important with this is kind of figuring out what makes you unique. What do you like to teach? Who do you like to teach? What is your specialization? And so that's where niching comes in, where you can kind of figure out like, hey, do I like teaching men? Do I like teaching children? Do I like teaching seniors? Do I like teaching, moms from pregnancy through till postpartum and, mom and baby classes, like kind of finding a specialization in that way. And so it's one of the things that's talked a lot about in the business of yoga space, just to kind of help teachers differentiate themselves, stand out a little bit, build their business in a bigger way, and in a more sustainable way, and that type of thing. And so, I mean, I just listed a couple of examples, but you could also look at like combining yoga with personal fitness, and that could be your niche, or yoga with Ayurveda, and that could be your niche, or yoga and essential oils. Lots of people are into astrology or like the moon cycles and stuff like that. So they can do things like that, or maybe working with women specifically. So lots of different things you could do within the yoga space. And I've interviewed people doing so many interesting things, like, yeah, specializing in women going through menopause or kind of through retirement phase, people focusing on like hormone yoga, which is like so specialized. I mean, even what I do with the business of yoga is pretty specialized and niche as well. So tons and tons of different options.
Thank you for going deeper into that. And I have to ask you, what niche you talked about mastering the business of yoga. Do you teach yoga sometimes now? And what niche did you find when you looked deeper into it for yourself?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I have not been teaching yoga since kind of like the early days of the pandemic. I was kind of all over the place. I was teaching online. And then when the pandemic hit, teachers and the studios that I was working with at the time were just needing a lot of support with their pivots and their changes. And so I really leaned into that. When I was back in Canada in the early days of the pandemic, I was teaching with kind of, I guess, my like quote unquote home studio at the time, a studio that I worked with doing digital marketing and management. And then I left Canada kind of, I don't even know, mid-pandemic, like late 2020, and went to Mexico and just kind of took a break I was still taking a break from teaching. And then fast forward within, I don't know, 6 months of that, I got pregnant and then I had a baby and now I've got a toddler. So I just haven't really gone back to teaching just because I was so busy and so full with the needs of like clients and customers with the pandemic. And then I haven't had that much capacity to add that much on since then. So I would love to go back to teaching, but just hasn't been in the cards for me quite yet.
I love
But
though.
to answer the
Oh,
second part of
yeah.
your question, when I was teaching, one of the things that I was really leaning into was teaching a little bit more like functional flows, functional movement. So kind of steering away from maybe like what you think of as like traditional yoga flows of like, these are the poses we do and these are how they have to look, and just getting into a bit more like functional movement, which can feel a little bit weird if you've never done that before. But I feel like that's a little bit more my jam, is to do that, like a little bit slower, a little bit more intentional, still like fun and flowy and music and stuff like that, but just stuff that's maybe like less of what you might think you're going to see in a yoga class.
Yeah, that sounds like my kind of yoga class since I'm a beginner. But thank you for sharing. And I did want to say that I love how in that time of the pandemic, when you stopped teaching, like you said before, you found a niche and a way to use your yoga training in a way that worked for you. And so you started a podcast before the pandemic, and in 2016, right? You started Mastering the Business of Yoga.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So kind of seems like early days of podcasting, but we already had our travel podcast, The World Wanderers, at that point. So podcasting wasn't super new to me. I feel like it was kind of, something I'd already been doing for 2 years. And so for me, I found after I got back from Bali, I was living in this small town. I was working for a yoga studio part-time. I was working for Lululemon full-time. So I had all these connections. And then my husband took a job in Atlanta, Georgia, which is like 6 million people, like biggest city I'd ever lived in at that point. I knew literally no one, and trying to find my way as a yoga teacher there, I was like, whoa, I was like really not prepared for this, because I had so many connections. People knew me, I was easily getting gigs to teach and stuff like that. And that's when I was like, okay, I need to like figure out how to do this. And so I started my podcast as a way to learn from people who were ahead of me, and then teach people who were kind of new like I was at the time, and then teach people who are behind me. And I still feel like it's that way. Like I bring guests on who are, ahead of me in their businesses, um in their teaching, and then I can learn from them, and the people, who are kind of following behind me can also learn from them too.
One of the great things about podcasting, I have to say. So
Mm-hmm.
when you talked with all these people on your podcast, what did you find were some of the main challenges that yoga teachers face when they're trying to run a successful business?
Yeah, for sure. So some of the biggest things are, teacher training programs really do a great job at teaching you what to do once you're in the studio, or once you're in like the space with the students. But I think one thing that's really missing is like, how do we get these opportunities, especially if we don't know anyone, if we're not already connected? How do we actually get like bums in seats per se, like get people in the studio? So the things that people struggle with the most are like, how do I get opportunities to teach, especially when it's so saturated? And once I get them, how do I get people to show up for the classes? That those are some of the hardest things. And then, say they figured out that, it's like you start doing the math, like say the average yoga class in like the US or Canada pays like $50 a class. If you start doing the math on that, especially with like how expensive things are, today for a living, it's like you've got to teach like 30 classes a week in order to make that sustainable. That's a lot of yoga to be teaching, physically, emotionally, mentally. That's a lot to be like giving, giving, giving. And so people start thinking like, how do I actually do this? How do I actually create a business with it? And that's where so many of the pieces of, what I teach in my book, what I teach in my podcast come into play, in terms of finding your niche, maybe building out a membership, for example, things like workshops, things like retreats. There's so many different aspects that you can start weaving into your business that are not just teaching classes. And that's a lot of what people just don't know, because a lot of that's not taught in teacher training, because, 200 hours is just, it's not enough time to teach all of this stuff. So these teachers come out of these teacher training programs and they just don't know what's like lying ahead for them. They just have no idea what kind of like the career path looks like. And so those are a lot of the things that I feel like they're just like, help. I have no idea what to do now.
Yeah, there's so much to consider when you're coming out of that certification program, I'm sure. So
Totally.
I'm also wanting to ask for a few minutes about the digital nomad angle of this, because there is a part of your book that it talks about traveling as a yoga teacher. Do you have any tips for how someone who is a digital nomad that trained to be a yoga teacher they're moving around, let's say every 3 months. How could they find work, or what are some ways they could find work?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a couple different ways that you could go about it. So there's, if you really like kind of the in-person side of things and you're wanting to be teaching where you are, and especially if you are doing like 3 months somewhere, or three plus months, let's say, if you're kind of doing like 1 to 3 months, this is a little harder, but you could still find opportunities. There's lots of places that will do like teaching exchanges where you can teach in exchange for like maybe accommodation somewhere, like at a resort or a hotel or like hostel, something like that. You could offer yoga classes. Lots of hotels that just need teachers. Like I know Selena, which your listeners are probably familiar with. Selena is a really great example where they're always looking for yoga teachers for their various different places to stay, because a lot of the places have like yoga rooms and yoga classes. They need teachers to teach that. So you can look into those types of opportunities. Also, just like studios in the area might be open to you, teaching, coming in, teaching for a couple of months, and then you can continue on your way. So that's the in-person side of things. And then, of course, there's the online option, which I think, again, silver lining to the pandemic, because kind of pre-pandemic, so many people were like, yoga on Zoom? I don't think so. A lot of people didn't even know what Zoom was, right? Like, it's just weird to think about a time and place when, like, you know, obviously our grandparents, our parents, like they were not familiar with Zoom. Like we were, because we were nomads, but people who were outside of this space just did not use Zoom. But now people are so familiar that it's like, say you're a yoga teacher in like Boston, you could ask your clients if they would be willing to do their sessions online, right? And keep a lot of your people either setting up like weekly group classes for them, or maybe transitioning them to just like one-on-ones that you schedule when it works for you. You can continue to just teach them in that way. Or you can do things like create memberships, record videos, put them into a video library, do that kind of Netflix model where people can kind of pay and practice at their own pace. So there's lots of different options for traveling. And I think, when I kind of started as a nomad back in 2016, I was really trying to figure this out. I was creating these really bad YouTube videos, trying to figure out, will anyone ever pay me for these? I had a couple clients that I like managed to get online to do privates. But really, it was like teaching was hard online in those days if you're kind of just like a small person who doesn't have a big following. And now it's just like, I think the possibilities are endless. So it's like so cool to see so many yoga teachers now who are like taking my business online, or I'm, traveling and teaching now and stuff like that. So yeah, definitely think it's like a cool, fun career for digital nomads.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of demand for it in certain forums and Facebook groups, people asking like, does anyone know a teacher to come and either come to the space, like you said, or just teach online. So there's definitely a lot of opportunities out there. Now, I'm curious because you have so much knowledge in this space. What are some other ways, including some more unusual ones, that yoga teachers can make money?
Yeah, for sure. So let me think. So there are obviously studio classes. There are private, so teaching people one-on-one. It's a great way to make money. There are workshops, so teaching people kind of like long form, 1 to 3 hour on a specific thing. Registered programs where they register for a certain period of time. Retreats, which I think we're probably familiar with as travelers. Teaching at resorts or hostels, like I mentioned before. All the different ways that you can teach online, creating courses, creating programs, teaching people one-on-one, all that type of stuff. I'm trying to think of some like creative, interesting ways outside of that they could make money within the yoga space. I mean, you
I
can definitely just like come to a place and like create a flyer for yoga and like do yoga on the beach or something like that. You can totally do things like that. So I think that's like a fun way, especially if you're like a nomad or traveling. It's like, hey, I'm in this place for like a month or a couple of weeks. Why not set up a some yoga on the beach or yoga in the park or something like that?
Oh yeah, just kind of make cash in hand on the beach if you charge for it. Or I
Yeah,
also
like buy donations, a great way to do that.
yeah. I also have like thought I've seen so many YouTube channels and social media channels with yoga teachers, and I'm wondering how big that is. Or I know it could be quite lucrative if you start going into like the yoga clothing, the brand deals you could get.
Yeah, absolutely. So YouTube, there's definitely potential with, I think, especially with like, kind of creating as like your top of your sales funnel where you can get people kind of discovering you and then having something that they can pay for after. Cause obviously you've got to get quite a few subscribers, quite a few like viewers and stuff like that before you actually start monetizing on YouTube. And I did interview somebody, she's not in the book, she's a more recent interview where she has quite a few followers. And she was talking about how, like, she's like, let me just be like very clear on like how much you make on YouTube. She's like, it is not what's paying the bills for me. She's like, the money is great addition, but it's like not what's paying the bills. And I know I have some travel YouTuber friends who kind of said the same thing. So I feel like just kind of being like, hey, I want to be like a YouTube influencer and I'm just going to make all my money that way. It seems like, I don't know, because I've never made money off of YouTube, but it seems like it's a little bit harder than maybe it seems, or you don't make as much money as you might think you're going to. So I think that using that as a way to get like kind of get people to follow you can be a great way to start. And then having, courses, programs, other offerings for them, I think is a really great idea.
Okay, that's great. I also am wondering about yoga and meditation together. Have you met people that have like they teach yoga and then they sometimes will also offer like just doing meditation together as part of it? I know that that kind of naturally happens at the end of yoga classes anyway. But I wonder if like, as you said, with the body getting tired, if it's something they can kind of pair together.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, meditation is a huge component of yoga. It's actually one of so in the kind of yoga philosophy, there's 8 limbs of yoga, and the yoga asana, which is the physical aspect of things, is just one part of that. And so meditation, breath work are two of the other forms. So meditation is a huge component of yoga. Definitely something to include within yoga classes, and certainly something you could like specialize in or niche down into. You could offer only meditation, pair it with, the physical practice as well. So yeah, I love meditation. I think I think if more people in the world meditated, the world would be a more peaceful place for sure.
Completely agree. We need it more than ever.
Yeah,
My
for sure.
last, I think it's a funny question. My last funny question for you is, what do you think about all of these animal yoga classes that are going on out
Yeah.
there? I saw some puppy yoga recently on social media.
Yeah, I feel like people have just gotten so creative with it, which is something that I love. I know there's like lots of different viewpoints on like, is this yoga? Is it like maintaining the tradition of yoga? Should we be doing this? Especially as like people in the West who've adopted this practice from the East. And, there's lots of things that you kind of get in and say about it. But I think, if I look at it from a business aspect, I'm like, I love the creativity behind it. Like thinking about two things that you love, maybe yoga and goats or yoga and puppies. Why not have a class that like brings people joy with puppies? I feel like it's actually really interesting because I was actually just at a goat farm. So maybe this is why it came up. And I said something about like working with yoga teachers as the thing that I did to somebody. And they were like, oh, cool. Have you tried like that goat yoga? It's like, goat yoga is like super popular and stuff. I was like, I've never tried it, but it sounds like it's like pretty cool. And they're like, yeah, until the goats like climb and pee on you and stuff. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, those things are never exactly how they look on Instagram. But yeah, I feel like it's like kind of a fun, silly, weird little trend that's happening. But, I personally love that people are just getting creative with how they can spread and share yoga with people who maybe would never come to a yoga class, a more traditional style of yoga.
Yeah, I personally attended a beer yoga class in Germany, and whatever we can use to bring people together, that might be even more controversial because is it healthy to be doing both? But yeah, the whole community aspect and just bringing people together to do exercise, but also enjoy it, I think is, the goal for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I know there's a lot of like, if you ever ask about beer and yoga and like beer yoga classes in any like yoga Facebook group, you're going to get a lot of different opinions coming out. But I think that the idea with yoga is like, can we get more people interested in yoga, trying yoga? And if that's something that gets somebody who would maybe never try yoga out, like, is that such a bad thing?
Yeah, I don't think so. Well, I wanted to ask you finally, what if you had to give three really important tips or takeaways from your book, what would they be? Why should people read How to Master the Business of Yoga?
Yeah, so I think the book is very much designed for yoga teachers. So I have a really dear friend of mine who was like, I bought your book. It's going to live on my bookshelf. She's like, I'm not going to lie. I don't know if I'm going to read it. And I was like, that's okay. It's very much for yoga teachers building their business. And I very much appreciate the support. So I would just say that, first of all, that it is very much, if you're interested in yoga teaching, that's who it's for. Um, I feel like a couple big takeaways or key points that I'd love for people to just know about and to take away from it is that, it is possible to create a sustainable career teaching yoga. There's lots of, people who are doing it and ways to do it. We can do it in a way that honors ourselves, our bodies, our beliefs, our values, all that type of thing. So I feel like the style of business that I'm really kind of passionate about is a bit more like heart-centered. I think there's a lot of like kind of icky things when it comes to business. And a lot of people are really like, I don't want to mix business with spirituality and stuff like that. And I'm like, okay, but just give me a chance to change your mind. So I think that's another one. And then I think the last thing that I would say would just be like, be open-minded with what you could learn and what you could take away. Because sometimes we have this idea of what something looks like maybe what it'll be like to be a yoga teacher, but maybe there's like other things that you've never considered that you could, learn from, the guests that are featured in the teachings of the book.
You've actually changed my mind because I have not been so involved with yoga because of like I have a bit of scoliosis and I feel inflexible. So if I could do an audio only class with people, maybe it could be a gateway for someone like me who hasn't considered learning to teach before into that world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and actually, with scoliosis in mind, one of the interviews that's featured in the niching section, she actually teaches yoga for scoliosis. That's her niche.
Maybe I need to look into her online classes. It's really great to know.
Yeah,
There's
she's
so
got
many
like a
niches.
YouTube channel and lots of stuff online. So definitely could be helpful for you in particular.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Amanda, for joining us today. When I saw that your book had come out, I thought of all the digital nomads out there as well who have already been trained as yoga teachers and they're traveling the world. And this could be a way for them to up their game in yoga business.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much for having me and for your support. It definitely means a lot.
Thank you. And if people want to follow you or find your book, where can they go?
Yeah, so you can find me online. It's MBOM, so mbomyoga.com. The book is mbomyoga.com/book. It'll take you right to Amazon. That link's going to take you to the Amazon.com store, but the book is in all of the various Amazon stores around the world. And then you can find my podcast anywhere that you listen to podcasts. It's called Mastering the Business of Yoga.
All right. Well, thank you again, Amanda. All the best of luck with the book, and I look forward to reading it.
Amazing. Thank you, Becky.
Thank you.